Hi, and welcome to Leadership Labs, an online experience for marketplace leaders who want to add more value to their organizations and do a better job inspiring those they lead. Now, on this episode, I'm going to unpack 3 questions that everybody in your organization should know the answer to, beginning with you. These 3 questions cut right through the complexity of organizational life, and knowing the answers to these 3 questions is absolutely essential to any growing organization because, let's face it, growth breeds complexity, and complexity, as we all know, is often the enemy of efficiency. So I think you'll find this to be helpful, and be sure to stick around until the end for a free resource for you and your teams to debrief this content together. Enjoy. I know some of you consider yourselves leaders in your companies. Others of you aspire to be, but at some point we're all leading something. So to get us kind of warmed up and get our heads in the game today, and since we are in a church building, and since I'm a pastor, I thought we would start with some confessions. So I'm going to ask you to repeat after me, which is a little bit elementary, but if you would just repeat after me. I may be in charge, but I don't always know what to do. I may be in charge, but I don't have all the answers. And for those of you who are sitting with people who report to you, that was shocking. Because they hope that you do. And the last one is this: I'm never the smartest person in the room. I'm just the leader. Yeah, and this is there's kind of the dirty little secret of leadership. And when I say leadership, I mean whether you're leading a department, a division, a franchise, an industry leader, or you've got, a direct report and she's an intern and you're not even sure she's a good one. So at some point in the organization, in your organization, there's somebody that's looking to you, or you hope to be in that position. And the truth is, and we all posture, I mean, there's no way not to, especially in marketplace, but we didn't get to where we are because we're the best at what we do, or we're the best leader, or the best leader in the organization. I made a list. Some of you got where you are because you knew somebody. That was my first job for sure. You're related to somebody. You outperformed somebody. It might have been a hiring mistake, right? The person ahead of you was let go and you were just the next person in line. You're not qualified, but you're it. And or maybe you beat everybody to an idea. And this happens all the time. It's not the smartest person. Oftentimes, as you know, it's the first person who gets to the idea. In my particular industry, if you can think of churches as an industry, they let you lead. If you can keep people awake 25, 30 minutes in a row, they put you in charge of the whole thing. So again, you are where you are, we are where we are for a variety of reasons, but we're not necessarily the best leader in the organization. And I tell the folks in our organization that all the time. I'm just not the best leader. I just got here first. And there are moments when it's intimidating, especially I'm 63, so as we get older, and then here come the 28-year-olds and the 35-year-olds, and it's like, wow, I'm really going to have to pretend because I know they're smarter, I know they're brighter, I know they're quicker, but I'm still the leader. So with all the posturing that goes on, and again, that's somewhat unavoidable, there's still the responsibility to get things done and to fuel inject progress into whatever we're trying to do. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. Organizational leadership in particular. And I've found through the years, and again, because I'm a pastor, you don't necessarily think of a church as an organization, but it is. In our case, it got pretty big, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But for me, organizational leadership is it's not complicated, but it's not easy, and in some ways, it's simple. And the reason it became simple for me is because I had to make it simple or I wasn't going to survive. So I have to, and I'm not looking for sympathy, and I'm not trying to appear to be humble because I don't think I am. I had to figure out how to make organizational leadership simple or I wasn't going to survive it. So I just want to share for the next few minutes what I've done, the thing that I kind of step back into and I retreat to when things begin to get so complicated that I'm not sure how to lead through the complexity. I was not, and again, one of the reasons is because I wasn't a great student. I'm not super smart, and I say that and people don't believe it, but I'm telling you, if you had followed me through high school and college, you'd be like, you're right. You really aren't that smart. When I discovered this became most apparent when I was in the 8th grade. And, negative things scar us, positive things we forget. That's why, when you say to your son or your daughter, never forget, and they immediately forget, but they won't forget your mistakes as a parent, right? So when I was in the 8th grade, I had to take a remedial math class in the 8th grade. So if you're already taking remedial math in the 8th grade, things aren't going well. So my teacher was named Mrs. Salyers, and my first test came back and there was nothing marked on it, and it just at the top of the test, it just said no in red ink. I'm not making this up, no. How'd you do it, Andy? I got a no. I think I'm the only one in the class that got a no. My second test in this same class, Tucker High School, okay, for those of you over in DeKalb County, was also a no. And so I knew it was gonna be hard to average my grade. I don't know how you average 2 no's. So my mom helped me with this. After my second semester in college at Georgia State University, I got this neat letter that said I was on academic probation. I'd already been warning, now I'm on probation. And my mom, no lie, she sat me down at their little kitchen table there in Tucker, and she said she wanted to talk to me about my academic performance. I was living at home, commuting downtown, and I thought she was gonna give me the pep talk, son, you can do anything you set your heart to. And my mom, looked at me and said, Andy, college is not for everyone. So, now there are several, so all that to say as a background, it's important. There are some advantages to not being the smartest person in the room or the brightest bulb in the fixture. One is, and this is an advantage, and this is why some of you have been so successful, and don't take this too personally, but I can relate to you. If you're not really smart, you're not smart enough not to try things that the smart people talk themselves out of. You know what I mean? There's the super smart people. You're so smart, you will talk yourself, and then people like us will come along and go, I think that'll work. And you're like, that'll never work. Then we make it work because we didn't know it wouldn't work. And you're like, I should have thought of that, which you had, but then you talked yourself out of it. So that's one advantage. The other is, I love what Jim Collins said, and I can't remember what book he said this in. In fact, it might've been a talk I heard him give. He talked about how much easier it is to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you if you're not the smartest person. And then he makes this statement, which I love. He said, level 5 leaders have the humility to aspire to be the dumbest person in the room. That level 5 leaders, if you've read any of his stuff, he talks about levels of leadership, have the humility to aspire to be the dumbest person in the room. So I always found it wasn't that challenging for me to be the dumbest person in the room, which actually ultimately makes you a better leader because you're surrounded by smarter people. But the biggest advantage, and get to what I want to talk about, the biggest advantage is in not leaning or feeling like you can lean into your academic ability or your IQ, is that it has forced me to make complex things simple. Not simplistic, that's not good, but to take complex things and to try to boil them down and to make them simple. And this is something I've had to do, not to be a good communicator or to be a creative, leader. I've had to do this in order to survive the complexity of leadership. Because, as you know, as organizations grow, and we all want our organizations to grow, as organizations grow, they become more complex. There's no way around that. Complexity, unfortunately, of course, especially in organizational life, is the enemy of just about everything. Complexity is the enemy of everything. Complexity is unavoidable because growth creates complexity. Complexity is the enemy of everything. It can begin to undermine the progress, and round and round and round we go. But primarily, as John alluded to just a few minutes ago, the complexity of any organization as it grows is the enemy of clarity. And clarity in any organization is really the fuel for organizational life, for effectiveness and efficiency. You know that. And clarity reduces sideways energy. And you know what sideways energy is. You realize you're spending a whole lot of money on stuff that's not making any difference. You're hiring into departments or divisions that isn't making a lot of difference. And you have sideways energy, which of course reduces the energy that you need to get the thing done that you created the company or that you were hired to do. And then the other part about this that makes it important is the people who report to you, almost more than anything, they want certainty. But we as leaders, even though we pretend at times, we cannot provide anybody with certainty. The only way to provide certainty is to know the future. And if you're able to do that, I would love, we're sitting right over here. I would love to talk to you afterwards if you can predict the future, with certainty. We can't provide people with certainty, but the next best thing to certainty in organizational life and in family life, the next best thing to certainty is clarity. Because clarity feels like certainty, especially when you're you're getting certainty or clarity from the person that you report to. You want somebody that looks at you, I do as well, that says, here's what we're gonna do in spite of what's happening, here's what we're gonna do, here's what I need you to do, we're gonna make it. So providing clarity in the midst of uncertainty, and again, 2020 was the litmus test for leaders who were able to provide clarity in the midst of uncertainty. And one of the reasons for the great resignation at multiple levels and for-profit, nonprofit companies was suddenly none of the old tools and none of the old tactics for providing clarity, they just didn't even work anymore. And so, there's a sense of, hey, I've got a toolbox that's always worked for me. And I was 5 years out anyway, or 7 years out anyway, or we've saved enough money anyway. I'm out because I don't know how to lead through all the uncertainty. Because at the end of the day, you can't provide certainty. We can only provide clarity. So consequently, part of making organizational leadership simple, not simplistic, is figuring out through your personality and your gift set, how do I bring clarity to uncertainty? And for me, what I'm gonna share in just a minute is how I've learned to do this. Because I've, again, had to step back into something that I could embrace, that I understood in order to move forward and to move forward as a leader. In 1995, we started North Point Community Church on this property. Well, we didn't have the property then, but we started the church. And we were confident that we would be successful and that this would be big. And it's why we bought all this land. And the reason we were confident that we'd be successful, two things. Number one, I wasn't smart enough to know that this wouldn't work. That was helpful. But number two, and this may be your big takeaway from our time together today. This is a very important business principle. If you have the only hot dog stand in town, your hot dogs do not have to be very good. I didn't see anybody write that down. That's probably the most profound thing I'm gonna say. So we had, in terms of how we were going to do church, we had the only one in town. So if you liked this way of doing it, you had to come here because it was the only one in town at the time. So we grew, but as we grew, what happened? We became more complex and we did multi-site and we started growing and expanding. And suddenly I found myself not the pastor of a church. I found myself the leader of a growing and expanding organization. And all the rules, you want me to get that? You got that? Sorry. All the rules are broken. Nothing works the way it's supposed to anymore. And I'm not equipped. I studied theology. I didn't study leadership. And suddenly I found myself dealing with a more and more complex organization. Yet people were looking to me, not for certainty, but for clarity. So again, I needed something to retreat to. And so here's what I did. I reduced organizational leadership for me down to 3 questions. And I want to give you these 3 questions. And by the way, I should have said this up front. For those of you who are note takers like me, I'm gonna move through this pretty quickly, but we're gonna send all of you who registered, we have your email address, I'm gonna send all of you a PDF with a summary of this entire talk. So you can just listen or you can take notes, but we're gonna send it to you afterwards because we want you to be able to take this forward, maybe use this with your organization. So I reduced the complexity of organizational leadership down to 3 questions. 2 of these questions, everybody in your organization should be able to answer the same way. And the 3rd question is a question that you need to tailor the answer for you and for the people who work for you. And it's a little bit time consuming, but even if you just begin with your direct reports, this brings instantaneous clarity in the midst of whatever uncertainty your business or industry is wading through at the time. And here are the questions. This isn't rocket science, but remember, I got a no on the first 2 math tests in the 8th grade, okay? So if you were looking for deep, you came to the wrong place. Anyway, the 3 questions are this. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? Where do I fit in? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? Where do I fit in? Everybody in your organization should be able to answer those first 2 questions the same way in a sentence, not a paragraph. I mean, I love to go to organizations and look on the wall. I got mission statements, and I look at these mission statements. I think no one in this organization can quote this back. If they had to, this is what they would do. I would say, hey, what's the mission of this organization? They would look up and go, to increase the da-da-da. I'm like, see, that doesn't work. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And where do you fit in? And where does he fit in? And where does she fit in? And where do they fit in? So number 1, what are we doing? Everybody knows in your organization, they know what they are doing. That's a job description. But they may not know what you plural, or I could say we plural, are doing. The we, and you know this, the we, what are we trying to accomplish as a group? The we fades quickly in the rush of the day-to-day because I'm going to work to do my job. We is what makes me, this is why it's so important, but the we, what we're doing is what makes me and what I'm doing important. I mean, and what it makes what I'm doing critical. And if what I'm doing as an individual isn't attached, if my dot isn't connected to the corporate dots of what everybody else is doing, then not only is what I'm doing not necessarily important, but I don't know what's important. And if I don't know what it's important, suddenly the responsibility you want me to carry for you, it just becomes a job for me. So the we is as important as the me because the we is what gives the me the inspiration to show up and do an extraordinary job for whatever it is that you've hired them to do. So for me, on Sunday mornings when I get here super early, whenever I run into volunteers, and we have volunteers here that show up before I do, and I'm the leader. I should get here earlier, but it's amazing. And not because I'm trying to, be a good leader, it's just intuitive. When I see any of our volunteer leaders, and everybody has a t-shirt, so everybody knows what everybody's doing, I just can't help but stop and say, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I say to them, they say, oh, no, Pastor, thank you. I'm like, no, thank you. I say, because if you weren't doing what you were doing, then I would be at my house trying to gather people on my lawn to preach to them. Do you understand that I can't do what I do if you don't do what you do? That the we is what gives me an opportunity, and we is what gives you opportunity. And you know all that. But the question is, does everybody that works with you, can they answer in a simple sentence, this is what we have come together to do? That's the question. What are you doing? It's the collective what? Now, this usually begins with a participle. We are creating. We're building, we're providing, we're establishing, we're feeding, we're supporting, we're ending something. That's your participle. You start with the participle. So what's your participle? What are you doing? And if I were to ask you that question one-on-one, and if you had to look up and to the right to answer the question, you don't have a good answer. You should be able to look at me and say, this is what we're doing. And everybody in your organization should be able to do that. Now, your pushback, I get this, is, our organization, our industry is too complex. No, it's not. If you can't reduce it to a sentence, you just haven't spent the time trying to reduce it to a sentence. And why is it important? Because clarity, and this is what clarity is. This is what we're doing. Clarity punctures the uncertainty, and clarity actually creates its own momentum. And when you stumble upon that simple answer to this is what we're doing, there's something powerful about that. Now, I know that you don't need a lesson on mission statements because it's almost like something we kind of left in the 80s and the early 90s. But a clear, compelling statement brings clarity to complexity. Stephen Covey told us this, 25 years ago, probably 25 million books ago. And when I read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People back the year after it came out, I just happened to be lucky enough. My dad was a good friend of Bill Johnson, who owned all the Ritz-Carlton companies, Ritz-Carlton hotels. And Stephen Covey used the Ritz-Carlton as one of his primary examples of the importance of a mission statement. And so Bill Johnson was a friend of my dad. Bill and his wife, Sandra, my wife's name's Sandra. Bill and Sandra didn't have kids, and Sandra and I were young, and they just decided we could be their kids. And so I got to know Bill really well, and he would take us on these fabulous, crazy trips. And so when I read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I said, Bill, can I ask you a question? Stephen Covey talks about the Ritz-Carlton and that, this whole section about mission statements, and the bellmen have mission statements, the maids have mission statements, the cooks have mission statements, like at every level in the organization. I'm like, how do you get a bellman to have a mission statement? Isn't a bellman somebody who's going to college somewhere and this is just a part-time job, And he's like, oh, no, you don't understand. I said, well, I want to understand that. He said, well, you need to meet Horst Schulze. Some of you know who Horst is. And so I had an opportunity with 4 or 5 of the folks I was working with at the time. I was working for my dad at his church to go and sit through the training with Horst Schulze when he trained the maids, the butlers, the bellmen, and the people who do the behind the scenes work at these expensive hotels. And it was honestly, I don't want to say it was life-changing. It was just short of life-changing. And I came out of that training. It was a 2-day training, and there was 4 of us. We sat there, and there were people who were translating in a couple of different languages, because these are the behind the scenes. These are the maids. That's what they call them, the maids. These are the people who just, create this extraordinary opportunity for rich people, basically. They work in a hotel they'll probably never afford to be able to stay in. So, mission statement. But we watch Horst take the importance of a simple statement and connect it to their individual job. And you could see lights come on. And the most powerful thing that he said to them, and he walks in, he's like super rich, his cufflinks, the whole thing, takes his jacket off, rolls up his sleeves, and begins to talk to these people. And he said, "We are ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen. We're not servants. We are ladies and gentlemen." And suddenly, immediately, he equates the value of everyone in that room with everyone they're gonna serve. We collectively are ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen. And then he went from there. It was almost like I was in tears. I'm like, I wanna work. It was so powerful because he took a simple concept and he laced it, or he draped the appropriate emotion on it and said, "This is what we're doing. You're not just making up beds. You're not just holding the door. We are ladies and gentlemen. So let's start with being ladies and gentlemen who are serving." Anyway, it went on and on and on. The point is, I walked out, and then, based on because when I read what Stephen Covey said about mission statements, I'm like, surely you're exaggerating. No. But I saw firsthand, and this was so many years ago, the power of a statement associated with a job description that connects me to we is so powerful. But for me, it's not just a leadership tactic. For me, it's survival, because in the complexity of whatever you're doing, combined with the uncertainty of what we've just come through and who knows what we're gonna go through next, people need that, you need that, and it goes beyond a job description. It goes to, here is what we have come together to do collectively. When you have that, so many decisions are pre-made. I wrote in my notes, if you don't know exactly what you're doing, you're going to have a hard time doing it, and you'll never know if you did it well or how well you did it. If you don't know exactly what you're doing. I know you know your job. I know the folks who report to you know what they're supposed to do in terms of their job. But what is the we part? And is it something that used to be important, but again, you get busy and it goes to the peripheral, because it's absolutely important, especially if you're interested in bringing clarity. The reason, as I said earlier, that you aren't able to answer that succinctly is you just haven't spent the time coming up with that phrase or boiling it down. And it is time consuming, but once you get it, it's absolutely gold. Supposedly, I've never seen this documented anywhere, but it's such a good story, it's worth repeating whether it's true or not, that apparently when Steve Jobs came back to Apple in 1997, at some point, he said, "We are going to build computers that are easy to use. We're going to build computers that are easy to use. And anything else we're working on that doesn't facilitate that, we're not going to do it." Or the actual quote was, "We've got to focus on what we can be good at and stop doing everything else." And everything changed, and the world changed. And it's not an exaggeration to say that he almost single-handedly, coming back to Apple Computer, impacted the whole world. What are we here to do? We're going to make computers that are easy to use. That's what we're here to do. That's pretty compelling. And as a leader, you know this, when you cast that kind of a vision around a simple statement and mission, the resources automatically begin to move in that direction. And so does everybody's attention, and so does hiring and everything else. So that's the power of clarity in the midst of uncertainty. And oftentimes it just begins with that simple clarity around what are we doing. Number 2 is, why are we doing it? Here's what we're doing, but why are we doing it? The answer to this question is what's at stake? What goes away if we go away? What problem goes unsolved? What question goes unanswered? What service goes unprovided? The participle is, here's what we're doing, but you've got to have an answer to the question, why are we doing this? And this is where you find your inspiration. And this is where you find the emotion. Because if we don't, whatever it is, something's going to go away, a problem goes unsolved, a question goes unanswered, a service goes unprovided, people are no longer have an opportunity to, children no longer have an opportunity, the community no longer. What is at stake? What's at stake if your organization goes away? And when you can capture an answer to that question in a simple sentence, that is what fuel injects the passion into the thing you've come together to do. And regardless of how mundane your company seems to be or mundane your industry has become, something in there somewhere, there's passion in there somewhere. And the reason I say that is because once upon a time, your company didn't exist. Once upon a time, perhaps your industry didn't exist. Once upon a time, that community didn't exist. And it was somebody's idea. And whoever's idea it was, there was a why behind their what. And even if it means going back to the history of your organization or the history of an industry and rediscovering the why behind that what, that is your opportunity to fuel inject legitimate, not hype, legitimate passion back in to the why behind what you're doing. And it's so extremely important because, as you know this, and there's so many studies, people want purpose in their jobs, right? I mean, people will take less money to go to a job where they feel like, hey, this is important. I'm important because what we're doing is important. If I don't do what I do, something goes undone, a question goes unanswered, a problem goes unsolved. And we all want that. And it could be, I don't know you, I don't know everything that you do, but it could be there is actual purpose behind what you do and what you've asked people to do. And it's not that the purpose isn't there, and it's not that there's not the potential for passion, but because you don't have words around it, and because everybody's busy, and because, growth creates complexity, you just forget. And I just forget. And I do forget. And as many times as I've talked about this, in fact, every time I pick up, this topic and look at it, I'm reminded, Andy, you can't cast too much vision and you can't remind people why too often. Because life has a way of crushing the purpose out of everything we do because life is complicated. And sometimes we don't, as much as we want to get it right, we're not sure how to get it right. If there is anything inspirational, I wrote in my notes, about what you do, this question should surface it. Why do we do? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And this, instead of a participle, this is a because. This is a so that. This is an in order to. Here's what we're doing because. Here's what we're doing in order that. Here's what we're doing so that. And again, when you can capture the words for this second question, you've created your talking points in terms of that bring passion to the importance of what you do. In times of uncertainty, dropping back to what and why is always a healthy exercise. In times of uncertainty, as a leader, dropping back to what and why is an important exercise because it recenters us. It recenters us. I begin my day every day, unless there's something unusual that happens, recentering my thinking on what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. And of course, as a Christian, there's a spiritual element to this that, I'm just a small part of what God is doing in the world, but I want to get my part right. And finding the words to help you recenter as a leader. What is it we're doing? Okay, I'm going to this meeting. There's so many things. There's, goodness, it's so complicated. Okay. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? You need that. Your people need that. And if you're here and you're like, well, my boss isn't here and I don't, I'm not a big shop, I run a little department or a little division. It starts right there. Because if anyone is looking to you for clarity, because you can't provide certainty, helping them understand, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it. That is a gift to whoever you work with. Now, so everybody should pretty much be able to answer those first two questions the same way. Here's where it gets not complicated, but here's where it gets more time consuming. And this is, it's going to be tempting. It's always tempting. It's tempting for me to just stop with what and why. But the third question is, where do I fit in? Not what is your job? That's different. But what is your responsibility? And what is their responsibility? What is his responsibility? What is her responsibility? How does what you do contribute to what we do? That's what this third question is getting at. How does what you do contribute to what we do? How does what I do contribute to what we do? Because to the degree, and you've experienced this, you've had some great jobs, some not so great jobs, you've had some great bosses, some not so great bosses. Somebody told me years ago, you learn a lot from a terrible boss, you learn a lot from a great boss, you learn nothing from a mediocre boss. So one takeaway is be terrible or be great, don't be mediocre, nobody will learn anything, right? But we've all had terrible bosses, we've all had great bosses, and you discover pretty quickly where a great boss helps you connect the dots in terms of here's why what you're doing is important. A bad boss just says, here's a job description, we're gonna evaluate you based on your job description, and suddenly you feel like you're on your own. So tease this out a little bit more. Where do I fit in? What is, and I'm gonna make this personal for you, but your responsibility as a leader is to help make this responsible or personal for the people who report to you. What is your critical role? Your job description has 20 things on it, but what's your critical role? What's her critical role? What's his critical role? What is your unique contribution based on what you've been asked to do? What is your core responsibility? What is the critical, and another way of saying it is this, what is the, if everything else fails, do this part of his or her role or your role? If you forget everything else, just make sure you do this. This is the thing I'm depending on you most to do, because if you get this right, we can figure out the rest. If you don't get this right, the rest almost doesn't matter. What is that for you? What is that for him? And what is that for her? And you would be surprised, or maybe not, I'm always surprised, and I shouldn't be, how clear I think I've made this for people. But people navigate, or people drift to what they enjoy doing in their job, and they also move toward where they get the most gratitude in their job. And if you're not rewarding, or another way of saying it, what's rewarded gets repeated, what's rewarded gets repeated, what's rewarded gets repeated. If we accidentally reward people for the things that aren't mission critical to what they're supposed to do and what we need them to do, they'll work their tail off, but their energy goes in the wrong direction. But that's our fault. If I've not made it clear to the people who report to me, if all else fails, break the glass and do this one thing, that's on me. But when I can connect those personal dots, beginning with my personal dots to we, things become amazing, and people have clarity, and people love to work in an environment where they have clarity around what they're doing. One more thing on this. So the tricky part about this, and what makes this work, is if you will take the time, and this is time consuming, to create a 1-sentence, not job description, a 1-sentence responsibility description for yourself, and then for your direct reports, and then begin the process of trickling that down within your organization. As time consuming as that process is, at every level where people can look on their desk and say, here's my 1-sentence responsibility description, you are providing clarity. And clarity in the midst of uncertainty is a beautiful thing, and clarity is necessary in a growing organization, because going back to what I said earlier, growth creates complexity, but you want growth and you want progress and you want clarity. And as a leader, again, part of my responsibility, a big part of our responsibility, is to bring clarity to that complexity. So I'm gonna give you some examples of this. In fact, let me say one more thing about this. If you're here today and you're the only person in your organization that's here, or you're here with peers, but your supervisor isn't here, or there are people that you report to, or whoever it is, they're not here. Let me tell you something you might want to think about. I would recommend, I'm going to give you some examples. You should create your own 1-sentence responsibility description, based on what you think you've been hired to do and based on what you feel like is most mission critical about your role in the organization, and come up with a 1-sentence responsibility description. Then wait a few weeks so they won't, so you can take credit for this. You don't have to say, I heard this guy. Nah, just wait, you own it. And you sit down with your supervisor and you say, you know what? I want to make sure that I'm focused on what you consider most important. So I've come up with this statement. Is this it? Is this the thing? If all else fails, do this. Is this it? And they'll either say, yes, thank you. Where'd you come up with that? And you can say, well, I don't know. I just felt like it was a good, you can take credit. Or they may say, No, is that what you thought it was? I thought, and now you're gonna have a good discussion, okay? So either way, even if you're not working with anybody who's gonna implement this, you can do this for yourself. It will not hurt for you to at least think through, okay, there's 10 things I'm responsible for, but what's the thing that makes the most difference in the role that I've been hired to? So here's some examples. Here's my one sentence responsibility description. It's to inspire our staff and congregations to remain fully engaged in the mission and the mission and vision of our organization. Now, if you attend church here, you would say, "Oh, I thought your main thing was preaching." It's not. It's not. I mean, preaching is part of my job description. But the thing that's mission critical, if all else fails, is to ensure that our congregants and our staff are fully engaged in the mission and vision of this organization. That's my one thing. If I never preach another sermon, because if I can make sure that our congregants and our staff are fully engaged in the mission and vision of this organization, we're gonna do great things whether I preach another sermon or not. But if I preach outstanding sermons as part of my job description, but I don't ensure that our congregants and our staff are fully engaged in our mission and vision, then we go sideways and we will never be as effective as we ought to be. So that's the difference between part of a job description and the one thing. Another example, our CFO, and I wrote this for him, and Rick and I have known each other before we even met our wives. We've known each other forever. In fact, Rick Holiday, I don't know if Rick's here or not. Rick is so smart. We went to Georgia State together, and no lie, we would go to these, lecture hall, and he would get the seat by the wall so he could lean against the wall and go to sleep. And I would sit in the middle and take copious notes and barely make a beat, and I felt like he already knew it all before he got there, but now he works for me. So there you go. Anyway. And he's the first person to say that. When I brag on Rick, he goes, "Yeah, but now I work for you." Because you know what? I was just dumb enough to try some things. Anyway, so his one sentence responsibility description is this: to create, implement, and monitor systems that ensure our organization remains fiscally secure. So Rick does all our property purchases. He oversees all of our construction stuff, anything that's business, insurance, all that stuff. And I'm like, "Rick, forget all that. This is what you gotta do. You gotta create, implement, and monitor the systems that ensure that our organization stays fiscally secure." That's your one thing. If whatever else you do, thank you, but that's the thing you gotta do. Because if you don't do that, the other stuff almost doesn't matter. See how this works? Our office coordinator, kind of moving into the daily stuff, to create welcoming and helpful experiences for our staff and guests. You are to create welcoming and helpful experiences for our staff and guests. Well, Andy, I would love to do that, but have you seen the way they have to come through the door and the keypad? And I'm like, yeah, that's a problem. Well, if I'm gonna do it, if that's it, then we gotta make some changes out in the lobby. Oh, okay. This is different. A job is like, sit out here from blank to blank, make sure you let people in, make sure people sign in. That's a job. A responsibility is, I want you to create welcoming and helpful. Is it welcoming? Is it helpful? Is it welcoming? Is it helpful? That's what you're here to do. Let's give you another one. My admin assistant, Diane Grant, we've worked together for a little over 25 years. When we started trickling this down to the organization, she asked me, she said, "Can I write my own?" She said, "Because I think I know what's mission critical to you better than maybe you do." She didn't say it like that, but that's what she meant, okay? And she was right. I said, here's what she wrote. Okay, you're gonna love this. The "my" in this is me. Is to keep my path clear of non-essential tasks and decisions so I can do what only I can do. Isn't that good? So her job description is broad, okay? But she knows the one thing is, Andy, I am gonna do my best to keep your path clear of non-essential tasks and decisions so that you are free and clear to do what only you can do. See, that's different than a job description. Now imagine if everybody in your organization had that kind of clarity. Goodness, right? When you evaluate them, but when you do those dreadful one-on-ones, it's like, oh, it's time to do that again. When you do your you know what? You start with that. Let's go back to square one. Here's the thing. Now let's talk about your performance and all these other areas. One more, I wrote this one. For interns, okay? I love this because I wrote it. Interns. Do what's asked, ask lots of questions. Do what's asked, Ask lots of questions. You're here to learn. So you're gonna do the menial stuff. You're an intern, okay? I want you to do what you're asked to do, but I want you to ask lots of questions. And the reason, and this when I meet with our new employees and interns, I say the reason I want you to ask lots of questions is you're gonna notice the things that are off purpose here quicker than we do. Because the longer you're in an environment, the less aware you are of it, okay? The longer you work anywhere, the less aware you are of the culture. The culture just becomes so normal, you don't feel it anymore. It's like being in a room where the temperature is perfect. It's like you're not even aware of it. It's only the hot and the cold that you're aware of. So we say to our interns, we want you to do what we ask you to do, but your responsibility is to ask questions so that you learn and so that we realize we don't have a good answer to some of your questions. We have work to do. Last one, our service programming director. That's the person who on a Sunday, I work for them because they're responsible for what happens from the parking lot all the way in through anybody's experience on a Sunday morning. Here's in our case, Elizabeth's service programming director, her one sentence job responsibility: to create engaging, transformational weekend worship services. You are to create engaging, transformational weekend worship services. That's it. Her job description is long, but at the end of the day, that's what I'm depending on her to do, and that's what we depend on those folks to do at all of our different campuses. So this is a little bit tedious, but I'm telling you, your folks are gonna thank you because when they come to work, they're gonna know what we're doing, they're gonna know why we're doing it, that's the inspirational, and they're gonna know that they have a critical role to play. Not because you hired them into a job, but because you said to them, here is where if you don't get it right, we all suffer. These dots really are connected. There are no non-critical roles. There are no non-critical there's no non-critical personnel. We hired you, even though you're new, maybe you feel like you're low in the organization, but what you're doing is critical, not because of your job description, because of your responsibility description. Because here's what I know about all of you. You want to hire and work with people not who come to do a job, but who show up carrying responsibility. And the only way to discover who's most responsible is to give them responsibility. The only way to know if somebody is, trustworthy is to trust them. It's the same way. So this is a gift to your folks. This is a gift to you. And for me, it's what I have to retreat to in the midst of the growing complexity to make sure that I'm able to provide clarity for myself and for the folks that I work with. So wrapping up, on high performance teams, there's always extraordinary clarity around what, why, and how. Everybody on your team should be able to answer all three questions quickly and easily because growth creates complexity, which requires simplicity. And clarity around mission and personal responsibility, and I could talk a long time about this, but I want to make sure we get through this. Clarity around mission and personal responsibility, it's like the oil in the machinery. See, your car engine, all the parts were carefully manufactured to work together, but you take out the lubricant and those parts that were perfectly designed to work together destroy each other because of friction. And this is the oil in the machinery. Clarity is the oil because I know what we're doing, which means we got to get along and collaborate. Communication is easier. Information transfer is easier. Nobody worries so much about taking credit for things because there's a we, not a me, but I understand the importance of me because of what we're doing together. Getting this right will diminish the unhealthy competition and a lot of sideways energy because when I understand how, this is so important, when I understand how your success leads to my success, because we all have an ego, we all have some, we're all selfish. When I understand how your success leads to my success, which facilitates our success, well then I'm gonna collaborate with you because I'm at stake, you're at stake, we're at stake. And somewhere in there's something bigger than me and bigger than you because we're doing something together. So, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? And where do you fit in? And where do the people who report to you fit in? So for all the B&C students out there who aspire to be A+ leaders, for me, that's as simple as it gets. So easier said than done, right? But important nonetheless. Now, to help you answer those three questions for yourself and for those you lead, we've created a free resource. Just visit the link at the bottom of your screen and you'll find notes from this presentation along with questions for your team to discuss together. As always, thanks so much for joining us at Leadership Labs. If you like this content, please share it with a friend and we'll see you next time.